Hi there, I'm Tristan from Truffle Events, back here at Cameron Interiors, having a play with some of their fantastic kit. We have the Borough Professional here, and I'm going to cook you a steak. Now to go with our steak, we're going to have some potato wedges, a little bit of salad, and we're going to do a little bit of a red wine vinegar just over the top of the steak. So, the first thing I'm going to do is make our potato wedges. Now, a couple of potatoes. I've got red roosters. I think they're a really, really nice, versatile potato. Great for mash, great for wedges, which is what we're going to do. Now, I want nice big chunky wedges, so my wee bowl here, and I'm just going to cut them into 4 or 5, depending on the size. I think with these ones, I'll just cut them nice and lengthways into quarters. I think that suits these sizes. Every potato is different size, it's going to be slightly different. Okay, so this one here, I will cut, and I'll probably do the same. I'll cut this one into nice, big, chunky wedges like that. Now, pop them into a wee bowl. Okay, now I've got a little bit of oil. Now I'm using a cold pressed rapeseed oil. You could use an olive oil for this if you wanted to. I particularly like this rapeseed oil. I'm going to put some salt, good pinch of nice Maldon sea salt. Now Maldon sea salt, it's not as salty as some of the table salts you get. It's got, believe it or not, a really lovely flavour to it. It's not just salt, it's got flavour to it. And a bit of cracked black pepper. Now, not too much pepper, because what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to season them up with a little bit of Chipotle. Now, this is crushed chilies, so it's got a nice smoky flavour to it. It's fantastic. Now, what I'm going to do here is just a little spoon. We don't want loads. It's not hot and spicy, it's more smoky and aromatic. Okay, so we'll have a little spoon here, and we'll just sprinkle that over the top. That will do. Okay, pop the lid back on there, and I'm just going to put a couple of thyme leaves here, go in there as well. These are fresh from the garden this morning, which is actually true. A lot of chefs just say that, but I did actually pick these this morning. So we'll just put the thyme leaves out. There we go. Get rid of those. And get your hands in making sure that they're clean, and just give these a nice rub together. Get that Chipotle flavour all the way over your wedges, okay? Make sure everything is nicely mixed together. Now, I've got a wee tray here in front of me, just to pop these in the oven. Now, what I want when I cook these is I've obviously left the skins on. Now, I'm leaving these skin side down, so that when these cook, we've got the Gaggenau oven over here, which we're going to cook them in. Leaving this top bit up here, we'll get a nice bit of crisp, okay? Because that's what we want, with a little bit of texture as well as that flavour, okay? So we'll mix those all together, tray them up, all right, and then we'll pop these in the oven just now. So we've got our Gaggenau oven here, which I've preset to 200 degrees, which is quite nice and hot. So what that's going to do is give us a lovely caramelisation on the top, okay? So we'll pop these in the oven. Simple press of the button and the door opens for us. Okay, and we can just pop those in and then shut that and leave those to cook. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to cook our fantastic piece of steak here on the Teppanyaki plate. Now, I've got this turned up nice and hot, but it's got 2 sections to it. When we cook our steak, what we want is we want a really nice high heat to sear the outside. Not seal the outside, you're not sealing flavours in, what you're doing is searing the outside. The natural sugars in the steak, we're going to caramelise them. So we want a really high heat to do that, okay? So we've got this section here turned up nice and high, we can sear that caramelisation onto the steak. But if we cook the steak at the whole time at that high temperature, it will be burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. So I've got this front section here turned down to a slightly lower temperature. So 250 degrees centigrade at the front, and then just 200 at the back. And what we can do then from the lower 200 setting is just cook the steak to how we like it. Whether you like it rare, medium, well done, boot leather, whatever you like, okay? You can cook it how you want. Now for our piece of steak that we have here, I've got a ribeye steak. Now the ribeye for me is the best piece of meat. It's absolutely lovely because it has a nice bit of fat through it. Now, the fat as we cook it will start to render down, so you won't have a big bit of gristle. What you'll have is you'll have the fat, which is flavour, actually marinating the meat while it's cooking on the teppanyaki plate. Okay? Now, really, really important when you cook a piece of steak is to season it. Okay? So we're going to do a nice bit of black pepper. Okay? And we're going to do a good bit of Maldon sea salt. We'll turn that over and we'll do exactly the same on the other side. Good bit of black pepper. And a good bit of Maldon sea salt. Now this is really important to do this before you cook it. And ideally you do it a good 2 or 3 minutes before it's cooked. And the reason for that is very simple. Salt is hygroscopic. Now what that means is it starts to draw moisture. Now in our steak here we've got a 28-day aged ribeye steak. Now during the aging process the water content of the steak has evaporated away, leaving us with a much drier piece of meat. Because you take the water away and you concentrate the flavours so the meat will taste better. You're not just eating water. But the juices that are still in there, that hygroscopic salt will start to bring some of that moisture to the surface. Now the good thing that that does for us is when we put it on the hot side of the teppanyaki plate, those moistures with the natural sugars inside will caramelise and they'll give us that lovely caramelised, rich, roasty flavour. And that is what we want. Okay? So giving it a good bit of salt, giving it a good bit of pepper, leaving it for a minute or two before we cook it. You don't want to do that and then put it in the fridge because otherwise the salt will just draw all of the moisture out and you'll end up with a piece of boot neck, basically. So we're going to cook it on the stove here. I've got a little bit of garlic, which I'm going to use as well. Okay, I've got a little tiny touch of butter, which we'll use a little bit, and I've got just a couple of thyme leaves that we'll just sprinkle on the steak, just to add a little bit more flavour into it as we cook it. Now, there's 3 important stages in cooking the steak. Now, I've told you 2. One was to sear the outside and get that caramelisation. The second is to cook it to that temperature that you like, whether it's rare, whether it's medium, or whether it's well done. And to do that, I've got a thermometer, okay? Now, if you want a nice rare steak, you take it off the plate at around about 40 degrees. And you can literally open up our thermometer. It's 24 degrees at the moment, but if we push it into the steak while it's cooking and take the core temperature, we want it to be about 40 degrees for a rare steak. If you want a medium steak, take it up to 50 degrees. If you want a well done steak, take it up to about 60 degrees. So that's your first 2 stages of cooking. Searing at a high heat, and then cooking it to the temperature you want. The third stage, probably the most important stage, is resting a piece of meat. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, while I've been chatting and I've got the salt on the outside of the steak here, I can just see some of that moisture start to come to the surface. Just a wee bit of that juice is coming out to the surface, which is going to give me that nice caramelisation. So, on the Bora Professional here, we've got the extraction in the middle. Okay, I'm just going to turn this up. I've got this nice and hot, and we're just going to lay our steak on top there. And you get that sizzle. That is exactly what we want. Now, I'm going to get rid of that plate and come back with a clean one, because once we have done our searing and our cooking, we're going to do our resting, that third stage of cooking, which is important, okay? Because what's happening at the moment, while this piece of meat is cooking on high heat, what's happening is all of that energy and all of that moisture is forcing the juices into the middle of the piece of meat. As the outside is searing and cooking, it's forcing the juices into the middle. When we rest it, we allow those juices to slowly permeate back out through the piece of steak, giving it a nice, even moisture throughout. Okay? Now, temptation is to poke, prod, and play with it. I've got my nice little crank turner here. Okay? But realistically, what you want to do is just leave it alone. Give it a good minute or 2 on one side. Now, depending how thick your steak is, if you've got a very thin steak, you don't want to leave it too long because it'll cook all the way through. Here we've got a nice thick steak. So we'll give that a wee moment so they can get underneath it. And here we can see we've got a nice bit of caramelisation. Now, not put any oil on here. With the teppanyaki plate, I don't think you need to much oil because you've got that lovely surface here, and the fats that we talked about in the middle, as they're starting to melt out and marinate the meat from inside, that's going to be enough oil. Because what oil does while the cooking process is happening is oil helps to transfer the heat from the teppanyaki plate into the steak. It acts as a medium just to help transfer that heat. It's not just there to give it colour or anything like that. Okay? So, a little bit of time on the other side because we want to get that lovely caramelisation. And again, this is stage one. This is the high heat. This is the temperature element here of getting that caramelisation and that rich, roasty flavour that we've got on the outside of our piece of meat. Okay? You can't see it, but the camera crew can smell this. Now, a minute or two on the other side, okay, and then we've got our other section here where we're going to bring it forward. I just want to turn it over and make sure that I have a good bit of colour on the other side as well. I do. Okay, so that's what we want. I'll turn it over and we'll just bring it forward onto this stage here. Okay, now I'm going to turn the back one off because we're done with the high heat and we're just going to cook on this stage. Okay, now during this bit of cooking process, I've got a couple of garlic cloves. I'm going to leave them with skin on and I'm just going to give them a little tap. I'm just going to pop those on here. Okay, we've got a little bit of thyme, which we're just going to pop on there. Alright, and a couple of wee bits of butter. Just going to sit that on top of the piece of meat. So as that's starting to cook, that's starting to all those flavours and aromas working together. Okay. Now, we're doing the second stage of cooking here. We've done the searing, we're doing the cooking to temperature. So, if I just open this up, and if I stick this into the middle of the piece of meat, okay, and I can see we're about 31 degrees already in the core temperature. So that is probably what I would call a blue steak. Very, very, very rare. Alright? You want to have it a little bit more. Now let's just see if we can get some of this. Turn this over. There, look, you can see we start to get all of these flavours into the piece of meat. And it's important to keep turning the piece of meat. You want it to cook evenly from both sides. At the moment, we've only got heat coming from underneath. So turning it over and making sure you get a nice and evenly cooked. Okay? And we'll just use this here to some of these lovely flavours. See, it's starting to make me hungry already. Okay, now let's turn it over again. Oozing on the top. Let's take the temperature of that piece of meat again. So it was 31 degrees in the middle. We push that in, and already we're at that 40 degrees. So already we've got a very rare steak. Now, the temperatures I told you are 40 degrees for a rare, 50 degrees for a medium, and 60 degrees for a well done. That's the temperature that it is here in the pan. We're going to leave it to rest. Now, when the piece of meat is resting, the temperature is going to come up a little bit. Okay? It will actually rise in temperature once it's into flame. That's a very, very important part. So let's turn it over again. Flavors on there, okay, and just keep a close eye, keep testing the temperature of our piece of meat. Now, using a thermometer like this is great. This is what a lot of chefs use. They get it exact every single time. Not everybody has a thermometer like this, but you can feel the steak, you can feel how it's cooking. There's various different ways of telling you how it feels as to how it is cooked. Now, looking at this here, I'm about 45. We're almost there. I'm going to take this to medium. Okay? So, feeling your piece of meat, I can feel here that it's not far off a medium. Now, if you take your thumb and your forefinger and you feel that muscle there, that's what a rare steak can feel like. If you touch it next to it, that muscle firms up a little bit, and that's what a medium steak feels like. Roughly. Every muscle is slightly different. Okay? But it gives you a good gauge, it gives you a good idea. Now these are starting to really, really look tasty. And I think we're not far off for that desired 50 degrees. Now, for that 51 and a half degrees. That, for me, is done. Okay, so we'll remember to turn this one off. Let that sit. We've got our steak here, which is now going to rest. So, while it was on the hob, while it was cooking here, all the energy from there on the outside, as the meat starts to cook, that energy forces all the moisture into the centre of that piece of meat. So if I took this now onto my chopping board and carved it straight away, as soon as I put my knife through that well of moisture in the middle, it would all leach out and I'd have a dry piece of meat. Allowing it to rest and relax and sit for a while, allowing that well of moisture to permeate back out through the piece of meat, that will then give us a nice juicy steak as I carve. Now, excess liquids will leach out onto our plate here, but that's fine because I'm going to use those. So I've got a little bit of rocket and I'm going to use those rest of the juices just to dress my rocket. So I'm going to leave this for a few minutes just to rest. Ideally, we want to leave it about 5 minutes. And we'll go and check on the potatoes and see how they're doing. Okay, so we've got our potato wedges. They're nice and cooked. We've got a lovely bit of colour to those, so you can just sit those there. Our steak, which as you can see is resting, and we've got those resting juices. Now that's all flavour. Okay. Now the core temperature of the steak is still going to be quite high, but the surface temperature, having sat for 5 minutes, might be cooling down. So we don't want to serve it cold. So what I'm going to do is just pop it back on the teppanyaki, and we can then give it a splash with that vinegar. Now it won't take long. So a very quick back on, give it a moment, turn it over, and we'll just finish it with a little splash of that vinegar. A little splash on the side as well, just to finish it off. That will be our steak. Now we don't want to leave it on there too long, otherwise what will happen is it will start tensing up again, bring all that moisture back into the middle. We've rested this piece of meat now, we don't want it sitting too long. Okay, so serve that off. We've got our rocket and we've got our lovely juices. I'm just going to tip all those juices on there because that is all the flavour. Whether you want to serve your potato wedges in a bowl on the sides or whether you want to put them on the plate, it's entirely up to you. That is a good wedges. We'll give our bucket just a little bit of a mix with all those lovely juices and the moment of truth. A lovely piece of steak. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut this into couple of these slices. Now I know you're wondering what colour it is. We took it up to 50 degrees and we allowed it to rest. So what we should have is a nice medium rare piece of meat. Okay? So I've still got a little bit of pinky in there.